Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Awasar. I'm Assistant Director for Academic Affairs at the African Studies Center at Michigan State. This is Eye on Africa, our weekly seminary series, and this is our last talk, our last lecture of the semester. So welcome to everybody who's following us. So today we have Dr. Michael Cserkits, who is an independent postdoc researcher. He has graduated from the Australian Military Academy, holds an MA in sociology, an MA in social and cultural anthropology, and has obtained his PhD in African studies. Currently, he works in the research field of military sociology and security issues relating the broader Sahel zone as well as the Near and Middle East. And Michael is here today. The title of his talk is European Endeavors in Northern Africa, a strategic assessment with the case example of Mali. And I was just talking to Dr. Cserkits about the using Mali, categorizing Mali as Northern Africa, and I think he's going to explain why Mali is considered as part of Northern Africa in the European strategy. So thank you so much for being here. I pass the floor to you now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sa. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Michael, and I would like to guide you through my presentation, which will deal about European endeavors in Northern Africa. And as Dr. Sa already mentioned, categorizing Mali as a Northern African country is incorrect because it's a Western African country. But why is it summarized in the strategies as a Northern African country? I would like to point this out in advance. In the EU security strategy from 2003, Brussels had defined a circle with a diameter of 2,500 kilometers around Brussels, and everything that's within this circle counts as region of interest. If you think about the range of 2,500 kilometers, it would likely be around the equator. And unlike the US, which has to translate policies towards the broader public just to one target audience, namely US citizens, the European Union faces the problem that it has 27 different target audiences because we have 27 member states. So it is oversimplified that everything below the threshold of the 2,500 kilometer radius, so everything in Africa is just Northern Africa. I would like to show you shortly the agenda. We will go on a little geographic tour, the horizon through Mali. I would like to present you also the strategic context, the European Union security strategy from 2003, and the European Union global strategy from 2016. It is, out of my point of view, important that you have at least heard about these two documents because they define how, in which manner, and also why the European Union is active in several regions of the world. And as we will see, between 2003 and 2016, there has been a huge policy shift. Then I will introduce you shortly to the conflict starting with around 2012, present you European as well as international actors on the spot of Mali, and then we'll show you the transition of the conflict ranging from the time frame 2013 to 2018, and we'll highlight the year of 2015 because it is, out of my point of view, a very, very enlightening example how discourses in Europe has changed over the mentioned period of time. So a short introduction, as you can already see, and as I've already mentioned, Mali is, of course, a Western European country. But again, if you take the 2,500 kilometer circle around Brussels, it would be somewhere around the northern edge of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So everything above this threshold is of strategic interest to the European Union, at least since 2003. Compared to the United States, Mali is also a huge country. It is about 2.5 times the size of France, and as least as our guests from the United States are more familiar with the cities mentioned on this map, but just to give you an idea about the ranges that some has to cover if you are present in this country. Just for those who are not familiar with the geographic location, Bamako as the capital of Mali is the place where most actors are stationed from the European Union, whereas everything northern of Timbuktu and Gao is mostly covered through French and other international military actors. Some key facts. Mali is completely landlocked. It is totally dependent on its surrounding neighbors regarding imports from the sea. It is the 8th biggest African country, and it has an estimated 18 million inhabitants, at least 2019. Actual numbers are very hard to obtain because due to the ongoing crisis and the conflicts shackling the country, getting actual and valid numbers is quite an undertaking. There are more than 9 major different ethnic groups, which are not the center of our presentation, but they are sometimes used in documents as source of the conflict, which is again already oversimplified. These ethnic groups are just one part in the very, very complex nature of the Malian conflict. And I would again highlight that only explaining the ongoing events in the country along a line of ethnicity is misleading. Just to divide the country from a geographical position, we have a desertified north, where the Sahara is, and a more or less subtropical south. Again, Mali, even if it has been independent only since 1960, the year of Africa, as most African countries had gained their independence through the process of decolonialization, has been a part and center of various African kingdoms and empires over the last 500 years. So Mali in itself has a long history which is shared by its inhabitants, and it would also be misleading to discredit or even neglect this historic fact, which is unfortunately sometimes done in strategic documents. For the Human Development Index, even if someone has different opinions on how to use it, just to give you an example, it is on 148th place in total 189 countries. So a very low life expectancy, a very low gross domestic income, and so on and so on. And of course, a high inequality. Starting with the security context, I would like to start with the European Security Strategy of 2003, which is, out of my point of view, the starting point to explain Europe's presence, or at least the European Union's presence in Northern Africa. Why? Immediately after the end of the Cold War in 1991, Europe has decided to take on the peace dividend. What is this, or what's about the peace dividend? It means that after the fall of the Soviet Union and the not necessary presence of US troops in Europe, European armies have declined since then, which had massive problems regarding force buildup. Everyone focused on peace building and sending troops abroad on, let's say, low-level missions. This trend immediately stopped after the terror attacks on 9/11 in the United States. And out of this context, because 9/11 was very present also in Europe, the European Security Strategy of 2003 was published. It was an ambitious goal to stabilize large parts of the world, surfing amongst the wave of countering terrorism. most interesting assumption of the European Union was that a ring of friends is surrounding it. So its focus, its core focus was of stabilizing distant regions like North Korea, Russia, the Middle East, and traditionally, because Central European powers have vast interests there, the Balkans. So again, there were no immediate threats in the near neighborhood, and dictators like Gaddafi were still in charge, keeping their share of being a source of stability, even if this sounds very, very To summary, the world should stabilize through the export of European values. No hard power contribution was mentioned in the European security strategy, but Europe was aware that it has to take a fair share on hard power interventions, but it decided on mainly rely on military peacekeeping and peace observing tasks. Africa and everything related to Africa was mentioned only 6 times in the whole document. Then all the strategic shocks happened. The Iraq intervention, the financial crisis, the refugee crisis, and so on and so on. And what you now see on the screen is the dislocation of European troops in 2014, or at least a part of it, where you can see that along Mali, Niger, and Libya, troops were stationed, and at least in the Congo and Somalia. I've painted on this picture 2 blocking positions, the black lines, because out of my interpretation, those missions already functioned already at these times, not necessarily or not primarily to foster European values or to bring peace and stability to the regions, but more or less to prevent migrants or refugees from going from the south to the north. In 2016, as the strategic context amongst the European Union changed more and more, the European Global Strategy of 2016 was published. It had a complete different surrounding, like, as I already mentioned, the failing state of Iraq. Turkey went away from Europe. Russia and its increasing posture in the Ukraine, the annexion of the Crimea, and the Arab Spring. All of these events influenced the potential and future involvement of Europe in its neighborhoods. So instead of a ring of friends, a ring of fire occurred, and Europe immediately focused on stabilizing near and close regions. And this is one of the reasons why, also from my point of view, in the near future, more European Union missions will be conducted in Northern Africa and the Near East, because this strategy is still valid. So strategically key regions which were defined in this document were North Africa. It is there defined as the countercoast to Europe, the Near East, the Balkans, and the Baltic region. So if we compare it to the previous document where we were talking about stabilizing North Korea, it is obvious that the zone of interest has become much, much smaller, and the missions much intense. So to summarize, only the neighborhood should be stabilized with a very high priority. Africa was mentioned 31 times. And here you can see the current common security and defense policy missions and operations in 2020. Most missions in Central Africa have been abandoned. In Somalia, no force is currently present. There is a training mission, EUTM Somalia, but they are training people in Kenya. And only off the shore of Somalia, there are European warships. But again, the main bulk has shifted towards stabilizing the counter coast of Europe. So, after showing you the strategic surrounding and the relevant document which may explain the reason for intervening, I would like to present you a short roadmap to the conflict in Mali. So already in 2012, there was a Tuareg-backed rebellion in the northern provinces of Kidal, Gao, and Timbuktu, which were mainly due to a lack of support for the Malian armed forces. There were corruption scandals, poverty. The Tuareg felt underrepresented, and at 21st March, Captain Amadou Sanogo launched a coup d'état, which was more or less, which had very less bloodshed and surprised many European leaders, because Mali was thought of as one of the more stable countries in Western Africa and as a source of providing stability, rather one that needs it. Unfortunately, the Tuareg-backed uprising gained massive ground, and after several months, radical Islamic elements intermingled, and the so-called proclaimed Azawad state was formed in the above-mentioned regions of Kidal, Gao, and Timbuktu. This is Captain Sanogo, and here you can see some of the Tuareg fighters. From a very certain point of view, this wouldn't be a problem for many European countries, except France, which has and will have strategic interests in the region, not only because there are some uranium mines in these provinces, but also as it represents the former colonial power. As we can see, the mixture of an ethnic uprising, which was then intermingled with religious elements, was used as the first step, or the first ticket to enter a conflict, and later on would be dominant in all the discourses. So Captain Sanogo took over power, but after 3 months, he had, due to ceasefire agreement with ECOWAS, which is a regional organization in Western Africa, declined from power, and a sort of turmoil occurred. Immediately after France sent soldiers there, the European Union launched their first, their until now biggest European Union training mission, which was introduced with the EU Council decision, and encompasses currently around 620 soldiers. They are mainly tasked with training and advise the Malian armed forces, and provide advice and command and control, train them on the international humanitarian law and how to protect civilian and human rights. But they are not alone. There's also the G5 Sahel Joint Force, which is unofficial, led by France. This force encompasses around 6,000 soldiers and is a multinational coalition of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mauritania, and the Chad. Then, in order to suppress the Tuareg rebellion, France launched its Opération Serval, which was around 4,000 soldiers strong, mostly special operation forces and foreign legionnaires. They supported AFISMA, which was an African Union-backed mission, and launched immediately in January 2013 and ended in July 2014. Currently, the successor of Serval is Operation Barkhane, which is already bigger and is around 4,000 and has around 4,500 soldiers strength, and it was launched one day after Serval ended. Barkhane trains personnel of the G5 Sahel. You see the reciprocities, and contrary to Serval, they have massive air support. It is one of the only missions that France launches that has fighter support, tactical airlift, tactical air transporters, and attack helicopters. And additionally, you see there is quite a dense, quite a high density of security providers in this country. You have OICAP Sahel Mali, which is around, which encompasses around 100 European policemen, which should foster law and order, or at least train judges and train other policemen to enforce the law and order. Besides the European actors, there are also international actors on the spot. MINUSMA, which is the successor of AFISMA, is an UN-backed mission with around 12,500 soldiers. They are mostly located in the north. MINUSMA is currently the most deadliest UN mission, as it has already the highest number of death tolls of all UN missions ever conducted. And it replaced AFISMA, I mentioned it before, which was totally underfinanced, lacked manpower and mandate, and therefore ended already in 2013. And luckily the UN had taken over with a very robust mandate. So what happened in all these years? In 2013, the intervention in Europe was labeled a humanitarian issue. All around the documents that we could find, humanitarian reasons, atrocities committed against civilian personnel were labeled as the reason why Europe should intervene in Mali. And you hardly could reject this opportunity. Because protection of civilians, if you are willing to transport European values, should be on your agenda. But already at the end of the year, I mentioned it before, intelligence indicated that these extremist elements intermingled in the ethnic uprising, and the European Union took advantage and reframed the mission in the bigger picture. Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb and the rise of the Islamic State in the Sahel opened possible alternatives to reshape the humanitarian intervention into a fight against international terrorism, which was at this point already present in Europe. Not in every country, but especially in France and Great Britain. And at the end of the year, it was transported through the greater audience or towards the European audience that an unstable Mali would directly threaten Europe as a source of insecurity, as a safe haven for Islamic terrorists and jihadists and so on. After the first soldiers after the first small contingent of soldiers was sent in 2013, the discourse was translated into a counterterrorism mission. And in 2014, it allowed, for example, to replace Operation Serval through Barkhane, with much more personnel, which much deadlier enablers, as I mentioned before, airplanes and attack helicopters. And security was the main driver in the Malian context because it had implicit outcomes for Europe. Additional to the high emphasis in all documents regarding Mali, Europe pointed out that there must be a law and order enforcement. And as this had already begun in January 2014, in the midst of the year, OICAP Sahel Mali was started, because the fear of a rapid destabilization was transported also through public media as a new leitmotif for intervening if you do not, as you can see in the picture below, if you do not intervene decisively in this country, you may have another caliphate. Just to mention the strategic context, there was also the US led mission against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And these pictures were immediately taken and transformed to reshape the Malian context, which was not that big of a threat to fall into another caliphate. But those pictures proved very useful for decision makers in Brussels to explain their target audiences, which again is not that coherent as in the US, where you have only one big target audience, and in Europe you have to oversimplify because you have 27 different member states, 27 different target audiences, and the fear of destabilization and the fear of radical elements is something that they all share. In 2015, many small countries throughout the European Union joined the EU training mission, or like Austria, at least significantly increased their part within the mission. Why? Because it was the height of the refugee crisis. You can't imagine if you were there in a European country of your choice, there were more than 2 million people were going through Europe, and nobody was aware where they come or where they go. It was, out of my personal experience, a kind of or a state of anarchy, because borders don't exist. People were feared, and it was the year where almost everywhere where an election in Europe took place, a decisive shift to right-wing and populist parties had happened. So 2015 was labeled as the year of containment. And exactly the refugee crisis that had nothing to do with Mali was used to contain also every security or constructed security threat that may come from this country. So problem solving was done at the spot, and a newly emerging security development nexus opened up for decision makers in Brussels, making Mali more and more an object than a potential partner. So what can be traced was that a shifting focus had happened from security in Africa to security in Europe. Europe was, from this point, as far as I am aware, no longer really interested in stabilizing the situation, but more than showing its citizens that it is aware about a certain security threat and that something has to be done in the south, as several scholars argue. And it was also the first year where in European policy papers, the introduction of the irregular migrant was placed. Whatever this means, it was an empty significant. Everyone could interpret whatever they want, mostly from the right wing or from the populistic side in Europe. This concept introduced by Brussels was used throughout Europe in order to sustain further involvement in Mali and other Northern African countries. So it was a starting point again of a political shift all over Europe, and their effects were traceable until Mali. And just to give you an example how you could think about the refugee crisis, this was a commonplace picture that happened all over Europe, and which got itself through many discourses and reshaped European views of Africa and the Near and Middle East for quite some time. I would like to give you an example about how you can see such a policy shift, or how I am trying to trace such a policy shift. Just to give you a small selection, what happened in 2015, EUCAP Sahel's financial frame was doubled. The European Union presented its Sahel action plan from 2015 till 2020. Brussels declared the European Year for Development. Peace and stability should come to the Sahel zone. It was one of the key messages in all press conferences that building efficient states in the Sahel zone is of utmost importance. And Mali was the most important state for a joint development program between the European Union and selected representative countries. So if you just hear these sources, they all sound very, very good. But what exactly are they meaning? What exactly are they telling? And what is their deeper context, and what are the outcomes for Mali? Well, in total, the European Union, which claimed that it wanted to stabilize the region, shipped worth 25.9 million of equipment, ranging from rockets, bombs, technical devices, and other special military equipment towards Mali. Especially our Eastern European countries are in the upper field with light weapons, machine guns, and so on. And if you look deeper into the Sahel Regional Action Plan, you can see its 4 main priorities, which can be summarized under contain, condemn, and control. Because no more say or talk about humanitarian issues or humanitarian crisis. It's just about countering radicalization, migration and mobility, and border management. Of course, you have to do at least something for the youth in this cynical document, but all in all, the humanitarian crisis was no longer addressed. And the European Parliament published also a document in the last where I would like to quote: asylum seekers who seek to asylum shop. This was an official, I'm quoting this was an official document of the European Union where they indirectly condemn people who came, people who flee to save their lives. And the European Parliament considered that units that the European Union formed and sent abroad must have offensive capacity. Everyone can ask itself why you need offensive capacity if you just want to help people on the spot and save humanitarian crisis, or if you really need offensive capacity to prevent and countering terrorism. Up to you. But why could this happen? Why is this ambiguity taking place? Well, at least at first, Federica Mogherini was appointed as the High Representative for the European Union Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. As former Secretary of NATO, she has strong ties, and as Italian, if you look at the second line, she had, at least, I assume, I don't have hard proof, but it's much likely, she has had political pressure from her own government to do something in Mali. Because Italy was in 2015, the year where the bulk of migrants came. As I mentioned before, all over Europe, there were Eurosceptic parties popping up like mushrooms. Governments shifted from democratic-centric to hard-right, or at least right-wing. Spain, which was the biggest coup and is until now the biggest troop contributor to EU Mali, sorted a special deal out with the European Union, as it was able to deny Malian refugees asylum status, with the simple logic that as long as Spanish soldiers are on the spot, the situation may change every minute and become better. So people from Mali are no longer able to seek asylum in Spain because they are coming from a country where Spanish soldiers are. and they are doing everything to stabilize the region, and it could stabilize at every moment. So I found cases where people are waiting since for more than 5 years for at least some kind of decision if they're getting asylum or not. And again, Boko Haram claimed solidarity with ISIS, and this opened a new connection from the Near East to Africa. Again, the focus of Europe was in 2015 on the Near East due to the refugee crisis, but the connection between the effects of the Near East had been transported to Northern Africa to make people fear another migration wave. So in 2016, Mali had become a prime example for European military interventions, because at least for Europeans and for European interests, the situation had stabilized. There were no more cooperations between European and African partners, because Europe had taken over and had done the solution finding alone. Mostly, if there were, let's say, groundwork or dirty work to do, special operation forces had done this, or Operation Barkhane, but everything else was done by Europeans, and Mali was more or less a passive actor in this context. 2017 and 2018, where the refugee crisis, or at least the influx of refugees really shifted from the Near East to Northern Africa, a new term was invented by the European Union, the economic migrant. We can now no longer find the term irregular migrant in official documents, but instead it is always talked about the economic migrant. Again, an empty significant, but you can guess what most people are interpreting in it. Then, in 2017, a militarization of all civilian EU missions had taken place. The MCCC is the Military Capability and Conduct Cell, which is a planning group. And they were appointed as new head of mission for all civilian EU missions. So at least military planners were in charge of conducting civilian missions. PESCO, the permanent structured cooperation, was introduced. It was the biggest investment in military mobility, in military development, and it was also the aftermath of the refugee crisis. The European Union shifted also to a heavy focus on maritime security, especially the Mediterranean Sea, as I mentioned before. Now the so-called Balkan route, where people from Near East went through Turkey to the Balkans and then to Central and Northern Europe, shifted from the Near East towards North Africa and then via the Mediterranean Sea to Italy, Malta, and Spain. So Europe was very interested in closing these routes too. And this is one way you can look at the events that happened in 2016, in 2017. We had around 360,000 arrivals in 2016. And due to the focus on maritime security, within 1 year, those arrivals could be more than cut by half. But again, the death toll was very high. The Mediterranean route is still considered the most deadliest route. Currently, there is another route opening up from the shores of Morocco to the Canarian Islands, which is even more dangerous and deadlier. But you can also look on another way to the events and effects in 2017, because this was also mentioned within this year, how to save money. And the EU was looking forward to cut down duplications in defense expenditures to build up offensive capabilities, as they already discussed it in 2015. You can see different models ranging from kind of airship, airplanes, tanks, and several warships. And they always used the United States military as a prime example, because you have a distinctively less number of different models in service in your armed forces. So in 2018, which will bring me to the end of at least the road through the conflict, three main argumentation lines were present throughout all European documents and were shared by most of its target audience. First, Mali was reshaped from 2012 to 2018 in a post-conflict scenario, even if the conflict is still present. The official and discursive, the dominant discourse lies within that there is no real conflict in Mali, because people who came from Mali are labeled since 2017 as economic migrants. So someone who is labeled an economic migrant flees from poverty and not of conflict. So therefore, everyone from Mali, as I mentioned before, is per definition an economic migrant. And even if no conflict is present, and this is the very pervasive nature of this discourse, even if now no conflict is present, soldiers have to be on the spot, because it could arise in the future without EU military forces on the spot. So having a big military footprint in Northern Africa is now seen as kind of insurance that something like 2015 won't happen again. But at the same time, they are denying the fact that the situation is still worse, the conflict is still ongoing, and the people are still suffering. So to conclude my presentation, from discourse to policy and back, these discursive practices that I have presented you, they changed very swiftly after the intervention. They manifested themselves in many policy papers, in official reports and communiques, and were gladfully or were immediately taken over by the media, which presented them to a broader target audience. The external events, like the refugee crisis or the terror attacks that happened in France, in Great Britain, and in Germany, exaggerated the discourse, and they paved the way to even more restrictive policies, to even send more and more troops towards these countries. And last but not least, those restrictive policies legitimated step by step even further changes in the discourses to reshape Northern Africa in a way the European Union wants it to see, and not how it is. I'm glad that you all found time, and hope that you enjoyed the presentation, and I would be more than happy to answer your questions if you have some. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think, do I see? Okay, somebody, I think you have somebody who wants to talk. Leo?
Yes.
You want to talk?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Very interesting presentation for
you.
people who are interested in Mali and North Africa. It's very good. I just wanted to ask if you've thought about the interactions of the EU and other international actors such as China and the United States.
Thank you very much for your question. I would try to answer it as appropriate as I can. Yes, there are interactions between the European Union and other international actors, especially China and India, which is sometimes labeled, if you search the term, Chindia.
Oh.
A mixture between China and India. This was the biggest fear in 2015, 2016, that the Chinese and Indian companies would win, let's say, Scramble 2.0 for Africa. Chinese influence in Africa is perceived only, at least in the policy papers, only as minor phenomena. Europe is aware that China has a very, very big footprint in Africa, but they are more concerned with security. There are, again, I hope this answers your question, there are interactions between the European Union and the China-Africa triangle, but China in itself has the potential to have to dealt with in a separate way. Okay, the European Union has no common position towards China. This would go far beyond this presentation to explain Europe's position on China. Again, Europe's position on Africa and the Chinese influence. They are worrying that the Chinese gain permits and additional exploitation rights, but they do not actively engage in it. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, that is a good assessment. I think it will be a good research. Well, I'm pretty sure there are many people who are doing research on that. But yeah, I have the feeling that was my feeling too. That yeah. But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So we have a question. What can the public do to hold the AU and EU accountable to human rights and support more equitable systems of governing, specifically addressing the end of extracting resources from African countries and Mali? I think it's Mali.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. What can the public do to hold the EU and the EU accountable? First, the European public cannot hold the African Union accountable for anything they do. To be holding the European Union accountable would mean that there would be a broad discourse about this topic in Europe. And unfortunately, there is no big discourse about European interventions in Africa aside the scientific discourse. So I would highlight again, it is our duty as African researchers to present a broad audience what is currently going on, because I've also done research in the Austrian media landscape regarding Africa and Austria. Maybe a small example may enlighten you. Austria, you know where Austria is, we're a very small country, 8 million people, okay? But we, as neutral, non-NATO member, had the honor of providing the mission commander for EUTM Mali, which is a very, very high military position. In other countries, this would be worth dozens of headlines. In Austria, there was no real communication about it. There were, I think, only 2 or 3 small minor articles because people are more interested in what's going on at the Balkans or at the neighboring town. You can only hold the European Union accountable if the public is aware of what's going on. And unfortunately, the public, however you may define it, I would like to tend to say at least the broad majority of people who can vote is not aware in Europe what's going on in Africa because they are not interested in it. Unfortunately, I hope this answers the question.
Thank you. Another question is, do you think members of the EU are genuinely interested in improving things in Africa?
This is a very hard question to answer. I do not think that these actions are just how I engaged with the policy documents, how I interpret them. Maybe someone with another background would interpret them in a totally different context. I don't know. But as far as I am concerned, the European Union tries to improve living conditions in its zones of interest. The approach, how this is done, could be better. I personally do not think that the European Union wants to worsen the situation on the spot. But as history has shown, intervening always or using the military as sole instrument of power of the state might not be the first choice, because there are also other instruments, diplomatic, economic, informational, and so on and so on. If you would tend to say use the military only as last resort. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you so much. I think Jonathan wants to talk. Jonathan?
Thanks, Dr. Sar. Thanks, Michael, for responding to my first question. I agree with your answer partially, that if the European Union wants to improve things in Africa, there are other ways, there are better ways. I agree with you. And so to the question, so if there are better ways, do they know? You and I know they do exist. Why can't they go for those ways which can work? Partnering with African governments or civil society to intervene in improving things in Africa. Why are they skipping? So where I don't agree with you is when you say, it's not that the European members of the European Union are wishing that things don't improve in Africa. If they don't wish, then why can't they go for those strategies which we know could be given a prime priority? They are selfish. I think France, if I'm not wrong, is a member of the European Union. And we have evidence almost every day from Francophone Africa, how France is interfering with the internal political leadership in those countries. So can't the European Union do something with France? And I hear some Francophone African countries are paying what they call colonial tax to France, if that's the case. A case is in Cameroon. Paul Biya has been president for more than 30 years in that country. And I hear he has support from France. France, a member of the European Union. If you follow that case again before we go to Mali, there is every evidence that European Union is just doing things, either they are out to sell or use their weapons, whatever reason they have, but those are very genuine questions. If you want to help, there are better ways of helping. If you don't do that, then we can interpret that in a different way. Thanks, Michael.
Jonathan, thank you very much for your point. I totally understand it. I just would like to highlight on the specific context of France. There is an old saying that the Seine floats through Paris like the Mediterranean Sea floats through France. And of course, France has interests. They have homegrown interests in Northern Africa, in their former colonialism, in Western Africa, and in Central Africa, and so on and so on. I do not neglect it. But you always have to take into account the current policy makers and their social and historical background. People who are nowadays making decisions have grown up in a post or in a Cold War scenario due to their age. They do not know the complex realities on the spot and the multi-level interactions that are taking place every day in Africa. Because from their background, from the historical background. They are coming from an age where you have the US and the Soviet Union, the two blocs that are deterring each other to make peace. And even after, I had mentioned it before, after this post-Cold War scenario, because if you were born in 1991, you're not a decision maker in Brussels because you would be too young. Yeah? The people there are almost plus 50. They have the pictures in mind of this peacekeeping period of time where the people are happy that you're there, okay? Because Europe, as I mentioned already at the beginning, has collectively chosen to take the peace dividend. So the mindset of policymakers is not aware. They do not want to be aware. They just cannot be aware because their socially embedded context isn't allowing it. So my personal guess is that within the next decade, where a new generation of policymakers and decision makers will come to power, we will also see a policy shift. My personal guess is that not later than 2025, we will have a new European strategy on the near neighborhood and how to deal with Africa. If this answers your question. Thank you.
The question. So I have read Malian analysis that argue that the Islamists have morphed into more banditry extortion. To what extent do the discussion in Europe now consider the extent to which this is really about the Islamist threat versus a more problematic breakdown of security, which would imply a different set of strategies?
One moment, I have to sort out the arguments. Islamist threat is a very general phrase. Again, in Europe, things are, when it comes to religion, oversimplified, and people do not really differentiate between Islam practiced in Africa or Islam practiced in the Near East or in Saudi Arabia. Okay, this is for most people, this is just a monolithic block. The reality about Islam in Africa on the spot isn't also a very, very big issue when it comes to implying strategies. Maybe I can answer this question also through an example. I've done some research about different security cooperations between the European Union and East African countries, and I've investigated security cooperation between an EU-funded and financially backed NGO in Somalia and in Kenya. And fun fact, the NGO first set up their approach in Kenya. It worked. And then they took the same approach, exactly the same approach, and set it up in Somalia, and were very upset that it didn't work, because they thought there were the same social conditions, same social circumstances. So taking religion into account when it comes to policies, and I can again underline it, is a task that has to be done by African scholars to a broader public community and to policymakers. Please go to them, talk to them. They are not your enemies. You can help to ensure mutual understanding if you make policymakers aware of these complex realities, because most often they are not, as far as I am concerned. If this answers the questions. Thank you very much.
I'm sure you're aware that Idris Deby passed away 2 days ago. Do you think his passing will influence the stability in the Sahel in general?
Yes, I'm not quite aware if it will influence the stability on the short run. In the long run, maybe. It could be that the tensions with the Sudanese government will come again, but this is just a guesstimate.
Jonathan has a question. You said that the goal of the 2003 European security strategy included the desire to export European values. Which specific values to where and why?
European values. Yes, I like European values. Democracy, equality, fair share of remittances, fair share of natural extracted resources. Be as you want, where you want. If you want to be a unicorn, be a unicorn, okay? Completely rule of law, equality, gender equality, and so on. It's everything you can imagine. European values are very, very broad. And why we are trying to whom? In 2003, again, strategic context. No one's hating someone. The world is at ease. There are no more big power block confrontations. So everyone has the right to be an European. This was more or less the mindset. If this answers the question, hopefully.
Can you speak, Jonathan?
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Michael, my third question was asking about the 2003 European security strategy to stabilize large parts of the world, including exporting European values. I think, I don't know whether that's really the case. You read out some of the list of some of the values. I don't know whether that was just like a sarcasm or you meant it.
Okay, then, Jonathan, sorry for the sarcasm. Of course, it was sarcasm. But what I would like to point out, if I may interrupt, in the 2003 European security strategy, we tried to promote the Westphalian European national state with all its further implications. And in the 2016 global strategy, the emphasis is more on the framework of the nation state, not so much about the context. It is in 2003, we wanted that all nations in the world are like European nation states, democracies, many parties, equal rights, rule of law, and so on and so on. And today we're just interested that these states are functioning, that they can execute at least their basic services, especially border control, because border control prevents people from moving to A to B. And this emphasis on border control is exported heavily to Algeria, to Libya, to Tunisia, because if they enforce border control, they get funds. They can apply for funds and for humanitarian aid. So today we are more exporting the framework, keep your people there where they are. And in 2003, we wanted that everyone is happy and that more or less the whole world is one government, to keep it very simple. If this is going to answer your question.
It partially does. I don't want to go beyond here because it's like the European Union is out to advance their agenda. The agenda in the sense that even those countries where they want to export their values to, I don't know whether they have some kind of agreement, like what the approach they use. And of course, you could say those are the people who are from where they are receiving maybe refugees in big numbers. They want to control and so make sure that they can limit or they can reduce the amount of refugees getting into Southern Europe. But the question I'm saying is, there's no way you're going to do things alone, or you choose your own priorities and you don't involve your other partners, if they were partners. So that's actually could be contribute to more problems in the individual countries in Africa. If they were really serious, they could have dialogue. They could have their approach to be different, maybe supported by the African political leaders, if they were really genuinely concerned. But when you impose things and sending your soldiers to those countries, Africans don't need soldiers, they need a dialogue. They need to be recognized so that they can have mutual benefits and an approach which respects both partners. But if the European Union is doing what they think is right, they are going to cause more harm than good in those African countries.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your argument. I understand. I would like to point for everyone again out that just because the European Union is present with European actors on the spot, it does not exclude the possibility that bilateral agreements, just like in Mali, are also happening place, and that there are contrary agendas. Like in Mali, you have the European Union training mission. You have the OICAP Sahel mission for law and order. These are European missions consisting of 27 different member states. And then you have Soleil national missions like Opération Barkhane, Opération Serval, which are serving French interests. And French interests and European interests can concur, but they must not.
But I wonder if there was any European reaction to the finding that the French soldiers were responsible of the killing of 19 civilians lately.
Unfortunately, this was only dealt with in Francophone media. As Austria is a German-speaking country, we do not read French media and we are not interested in their problems. So no, there was also in English or in English-speaking countries, there were some reactions, but everything, so the line Germany, Austria, Italy, and everything eastwards didn't notice.
If there's time, can I say something?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was listening to the conversation between Jonathan and Michael, and I wrote a few things there, but I wanted to voice that, is that we need to understand, Africans, we need to understand that EU has its own interests and it wants to protect its own interests. And we can't expect EU to just do humanitarian stuff for us against its own interests sometimes. And if France is doing something that is going to benefit EU as a whole, EU is not going to go against its own, you know,
that's the case.
it's going to support that country to do what they are doing because it's going to benefit. We need to really understand that at this point in the international game, Africa needs to be thinking about changing how we play our games and maybe give more power to EU to do more negotiating for all African countries, whatever we want to do. But we're not gonna be waiting and hoping that somebody is going to be thinking of us. EU has obligations to its own populations. We need to make our leaders understand that they should have obligations to their own populations. And until we do, we're going to be in this situation. We're just going to argue. We're going to talk to Michael, who's a researcher, and it doesn't do anything. So that was one of those. And somebody talked about Chad and what's going to change. And reading the news, it sounds like, you know, the son of Idris is taking over. So the policies are going to say the same. I actually got an email where it looks like he had, you know, the main posts were taken either by his sons, his daughters, his nephews, so it's the same policy, even if he's dead. So anyway, those are my 2 cents that I wanted to bring into the conversation.
Just to thank you very much. Just to keep in mind, you can complicate. I would like to give you a short example from Mali.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, there are European actors, there are national actors, and there are international actors. And to complicate it, there are French soldiers in the EU-led mission, there are French soldiers in the national mission, and there are French soldiers in the UN, in the international mission. And do not expect those 3 actors to follow the same goal. That's as much as I can tell you. But there are also Spanish soldiers in the EU. There are also Spanish soldiers in the UN, and they have also sometimes contrary objectives. So no, the EU is no coherent actor. Please do not misread me. The EU is no coherent actor. We have one EU, which consists of 27 different member states. And if the EU, the European Commission, acts in Africa, it always does it at the smallest nominator from 27 member states. And bilateral agreements between at least the bigger member states that have military and economic power and interests in Africa will always, we have to be so honest to ourselves, they will always go on national agendas too. And sometimes use the EU as a proxy, sometimes their goals collide, sometimes they diverge. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for that explanation. And the speaker who just left, Dr. Sar, who was that? Was it the one who spoke before Michael?
Oh, that's Leo.
Yeah, Leo. Oh, yeah, thank you. I also wanted to follow up from where Leo stopped by saying what researchers like Michael are doing and what we, the audience, to work like what Michael has shared with us is very important. What we are doing is scholarly, is in sharing facts and information in the public domain, which is a good thing in scholarship. And we need to question some of the content presented to us. So it's not that we are maybe blaming Michael, or we are directing our discourse to a wrong person. That we are only engaging in public, which is a good thing. And we might even need more of these facts, like who is on the ground, what are their responsibilities in bringing peace or sustaining the chaos in Africa. We might not have all the details, but the presence, especially of European Union and other external actors in Africa, they are a part of the problem, and we need our students to know that. We need people to know that the problems in Africa are not just African problems. They have a long history. External actors are they are implicated. Some left, but did not leave. They are still there through some of the political leaders we have in Africa, the transitions we experience in Africa, the kind of elections we have in Africa. So there's so much information, unless you are involved in research or you are on the ground to know exactly what's going on, is very hard to know. So what we are sharing is good. This kind of work, like what Michael is bringing to us, is very important for us as scholars and the younger people we are teaching who might want to do what Michael is doing by going to do research in Mali, get the real facts and highlight the facts in a specific time in the history of Africa.
Thank you.
Any more questions, comments?
So Dr. Sa, if I may, thank you everyone for the conversation and for your questions. Please feel free to contact me via email. I'm more than happy to share knowledge and resource and build up a vast network in contributing to a more broader discourse and discussion about these issues. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming and sharing your research with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you everybody who came and and ask questions. So this is the last Eye on Africa lecture of the semester. We wish you all a very safe and pleasant summer. We'll hopefully see you next fall. Bye, everybody.
Okay.